once seen as a loving caregiver. Betty Whittaker is now at the center of heartbreaking allegations, accused of abusing and neglecting the very people she was supposed to protect. The story has shaken those who followed her journey for months. It's a story of family, trust, and betrayal. How did it all come to this? What happened behind closed doors in that small West Virginia home that has now become the focus of so much speculation and sorrow? For many viewers, Betty was a familiar face, often spoken about in connection with the Whittaker family, one of the most talked about families on the internet. Her involvement with them drew both empathy and criticism. But now, the narrative has shifted dramatically. Allegations of abuse and neglect have turned Betty from a figure of compassion into one surrounded by questions, confusion, and concern. According to multiple online discussions and reports, Betty recently faced a court hearing related to these allegations. The details, however, are hidden behind sealed court records, something that has only fueled public curiosity and debate. In most states, court records are public. Anyone can walk into a courthouse and request to see the documents. But in West Virginia, cases involving Adult Protective Services, APS, are confidential. They are sealed to protect the privacy of those involved. That confidentiality, while meant to safeguard victims, has left the public grasping for answers. What exactly is Betty being accused of? What evidence was presented in court? And perhaps most hauntingly, what has happened to the people she once cared for? As this story unfolds, the truth seems just out of reach. And that uncertainty, that silence from the legal system, has opened the floodgates for speculation online. Some people insist that Betty is the victim of misunderstandings and false claims, saying she gave her life to caring for others and is now being punished for it. Others believe the court's involvement means there must be serious evidence of wrongdoing. One thing is clear: something went terribly wrong. According to sources close to the situation, Betty had been acting as a guardian and payee, meaning she was responsible for managing the daily lives and finances of her relatives. That's a position that comes with deep responsibility and immense trust. But when allegations of abuse or neglect arise against someone in that role, it's not just a legal issue. It's a moral one. Those who once supported Betty are now divided. Social media has become a battleground of opinions, with users dissecting every detail, every rumor, every clip. Some channels have gone as far as to claim that Betty's alleged mistreatment had been happening for years. Others argue that she was overwhelmed, unsupported, and unfairly blamed for systemic failures far beyond her control. In the midst of all this noise, one important fact remains. The court hearing happened, but the results have not been made public. West Virginia's confidentiality laws regarding APS proceedings mean that the only people who truly know what happened inside that courtroom are the ones who were there. Many people online were waiting for someone, anyone, to come forward with updates. Patrick and Eric, both individuals once connected to the Whittakers, had been known to share information in the past. But according to reports, both were ordered to stay away from the family and refrain from discussing them. Eric reportedly stepped away willingly, while Patrick continued to post until he was allegedly told to stop. With those voices now silent, the flow of inside information has completely dried up. And that silence has only made the mystery deeper. What's really happening to Betty Whittaker right now? Has she been found guilty of neglect, or is she still waiting for her day in court? Has she accepted responsibility, or is she fighting to clear her name? The public doesn't know, and that uncertainty keeps the story alive. Many are also wondering what will happen next for the Whittaker family members she once cared for. Will they be placed in the care of the state, or reunited with her later if the court deems her fit? Will there be justice or heartbreak? The internet's fascination with this case isn't just about gossip or curiosity. It's about the bigger issue: how easily the line between care and control can blur when vulnerable people depend on one person to meet all their needs. For every Betty Whittaker out there, there's a deeper question society must ask: who watches the caregivers? Who ensures that those who are supposed to protect the weak don't become their oppressors? This story isn't just about one woman in West Virginia. It's about a system that sometimes fails to see the warning signs and the devastating consequences that follow when trust is broken. So as the rumors continue and the court remains silent, the world is left with only fragments of a story, pieces of truth scattered between what's said, what's assumed, and what's hidden behind sealed records. And while no one knows what will come next, one thing is certain: the Betty Whittaker case has become a mirror, reflecting not only the flaws in the legal system but also the fragile boundaries between care, power, and neglect. Comment below. What do you think really happened in the Whittaker case? Is Betty being unfairly targeted, or is there more to this story than anyone realizes? When news broke that Betty Whittaker was facing legal proceedings connected to allegations of abuse and neglect, many thought answers would soon follow. But what they didn't expect was silence, the kind of silence that leaves a community uneasy. Guessing and desperate for the truth, the court hearing happened quietly, without cameras, without reporters, and without any official statement released to the public. For most people, that silence feels like a wall. No confirmation, no denial. Just questions that echo louder with every passing day. The reason for that silence lies deep in the laws of West Virginia. Unlike many other states, West Virginia has strict confidentiality protections for cases involving Adult Protective Services, APS. These laws were created to protect the privacy of vulnerable adults who are victims of abuse, neglect, or exploitation. But in the case of Betty Whittaker, that very law, meant to protect, has instead created confusion and controversy. Those who have followed the Whittaker family for years know that their story has always been complex. The family, who gained public attention through online documentaries and videos, became a symbol of both human resilience and tragedy. And for some, Betty represented stability, a caregiver who stepped in when others wouldn't. That's why these allegations have cut so deep. To those who once defended her, this situation feels impossible to believe. To others who watch the tension grow around her name, it feels like the truth is finally catching up. But the reality is this: we don't know. Because of West Virginia's confidentiality laws, the court documents are sealed. According to the state's policy, court records involving Adult Protective Services proceedings are generally confidential and not accessible to the public. That single sentence has changed everything. It means that no one outside the legal process, no journalist, no YouTuber, no concerned supporter, can access the official documents to confirm what really happened. It means that rumors have replaced facts, and opinions have taken the place of truth. And it means Betty Whittaker's story now lives in a gray area, somewhere between innocence and guilt, compassion and cruelty. Many content creators, bloggers, and community pages have tried to piece together what might have occurred. Some claim to have inside knowledge. Others speculate based on social media activity, screenshots, or secondhand updates. But without access to court records, none of it can be proven. The irony is painful. While West Virginia's laws aim to protect the identities of victims, they also protect the accused from public accountability, at least for now. Still, certain clues have emerged. It's believed that Betty's hearing took place in a circuit court, the same level of court that typically handles APS-related matters. According to multiple sources online, this court session was tied to her alleged neglect of individuals under her care. Those familiar with the situation have said that Betty acted as a guardian and payee, meaning she was responsible for handling the daily needs and financial matters of those individuals. That's a powerful position, one built entirely on trust. And when trust is broken in that role, the system steps in quickly. The allegations themselves of neglect and possible abuse have not been publicly detailed. But based on what's been shared by those following the case, the accusations likely center around Betty's treatment of her relatives and the conditions under which they were living. Some reports have mentioned that one of her relatives may have been moved from the home following the alleged incident. Others suggest that Betty herself may have been ordered to make changes in her caregiving arrangements. But because the documents are sealed, the truth remains locked away. That's where the emotional tension truly lies. Imagine caring for someone day after day, year after year, and suddenly being accused of neglecting them. Whether those allegations are true or not, the public perception alone can destroy a reputation overnight. Betty Whittaker is living that reality, but then again, imagine being a vulnerable adult, dependent on someone else for food, safety, and medical care, and feeling helpless in your own home. That is the other side of this story, and one that cannot be ignored. This duality, the caregiver and the cared for, is what makes this case so emotionally charged. People see what they want to see. Some see Betty as a villain. Others see her as a victim of gossip, isolation, and burnout. The internet has amplified both perspectives. After the court hearing, many expected Patrick or Eric, two individuals previously associated with the Whittaker family, to share an update, but both were reportedly told to stay away from the family and refrain from discussing them publicly. Eric seemed to walk away easily, while Patrick resisted longer before being silenced as well. With their absence, the steady flow of updates stopped. The YouTube and Facebook communities that once thrived on real-time information about the Whittakers suddenly found themselves with nothing but speculation and archived videos to go on. That vacuum created space, and where there's space, the internet fills it with theories. Some said Betty had been unfairly accused by jealous or vengeful relatives. Others suggested the allegations had merit, and that the state would not have gotten involved without strong evidence. And then there were those who believed that both could be true, that Betty might not have been cruel, but may have failed to provide the proper care or meet certain state standards. Whatever the truth, the silence of the court system has turned this into something bigger than one case. It's now a symbol of how fragile trust is between caregivers and those they protect, and how little the public really knows about what happens inside the walls of family homes. In many states, Adult Protective Services is responsible for investigating any claim of abuse or neglect involving an elderly or dependent adult. These investigations often happen quietly, sometimes with little notice to the outside world. They're meant to ensure safety. But when they lead to court proceedings like Betty's, the public often learns almost nothing, not because the case isn't important, but because privacy laws are so strict that secrecy leaves a void, a place where empathy, fear, and frustration all collide. For Betty's supporters, this feels like an injustice, like a woman who gave her life to others is being stripped of her dignity without being allowed to defend herself publicly. For her critics, this feels like long overdue accountability, a reckoning for someone who may have crossed the line. Both sides are waiting for clarity. Both sides want closure, but neither can get it until or unless those records are ever made public, and that may never happen. What we know for certain is this: Adult Protective Services records are sealed by law. The only people who can request access are officials like the Attorney General, auditors, or ombudsman. Even then, disclosure requires a court order, and that almost never happens in APS cases. So the public may never know what truly unfolded in that courtroom. The verdict, the evidence, the testimony, all of it remains locked away. But even without the official record, the emotional truth of the case has already rippled through the community. It has forced people to look closer at the cracks in the caregiving system. It has reminded us how quickly admiration can turn to suspicion, how compassion can become controversy. And for those who once believed Betty Whittaker could do no wrong, it has raised a painful question: how well do we ever really know the people we trust to care for others? The Betty Whittaker case isn't just a headline, it's a mirror held up to society, reflecting our assumptions about caregiving, aging, and justice. Whether Betty is innocent or guilty, her name will now forever be tied to this story of secrecy, pain, and unanswered questions. Comment below. Do you believe these confidentiality laws help protect victims, or do they allow potential abusers to hide behind them? The news about Betty Whittaker's court case didn't just shock people, it split them. Almost overnight, the community that had once rallied around the Whittaker family became deeply divided. For months, Betty's name had been synonymous with care, responsibility, and resilience. She was often viewed as the strong figure holding everything together. But when whispers of legal trouble started circulating, that image began to crumble. Suddenly, everyone had an opinion, and everyone wanted to be right. On social media, conversations turned heated. Comment sections filled with emotional arguments, long threads, and passionate defenses. Some users demanded patience and compassion. Others wanted answers, or justice. The tone of the discussions revealed something deeper. This wasn't just about Betty anymore. It was about what she represented. To many, she symbolized the invisible labor of caregiving, the endless, thankless work that often goes unnoticed until something goes wrong. People saw their own mothers, sisters, and grandmothers in her. Women who give everything only to be judged harshly when they falter. But to others, Betty became a warning, proof that power in the wrong hands can be devastating. That when someone has complete control over another person's life, that control can quietly transform into neglect or even abuse. Whether intentional or not, the emotional reactions were intense because the Whittaker family's story had already touched millions. Viewers felt connected. They had cried watching the family's struggles. They had admired their perseverance. So, hearing that the caregiver who stood beside them was now accused of harming them felt personal. It was as if something sacred had been broken. For Betty's defenders, the backlash felt cruel. They argued that people were quick to condemn without evidence, forgetting how much Betty had done for her family. They pointed out how hard it is to care for adults with severe needs, how draining, both emotionally and financially, that role can be. Many asked the question that no one seemed to want to answer. Where was the help for her? For her critics, however, the situation was long overdue. They believed the warning signs had been visible all along. Some said that the home environment seemed concerning from past accounts, and that state intervention was necessary to protect the vulnerable members of the family. But amid all these opinions, one thing was painfully clear: no one really knew the truth. The people arguing online were drawing conclusions from fragments, secondhand stories, social media posts, and speculation. The real story remained locked inside sealed court documents. The emotional intensity only grew when people realized that those who once provided updates about the family, Patrick and Eric, had both gone silent. Eric stepped away completely, reportedly disinterested in continuing the back-and-forth drama. Patrick, however, seemed conflicted. He had been vocal before, sharing his own perspective and occasionally posting updates. But according to reports, even he was allegedly instructed to stop discussing the Whittakers altogether. When those voices disappeared, the silence became deafening. People began filling the gaps themselves, inventing stories, piecing together theories, and speculating about what might have happened behind closed doors. In the absence of facts, imagination takes over. And the internet's imagination is relentless. That's when the story began to change shape, from a straightforward legal issue to a full-blown mystery. A mystery wrapped in emotion, frustration, and fear. Some creators started making videos suggesting that Betty had been betrayed, that those closest to her had turned on her after years of her service. Others took a different stance, saying that justice was finally being served for the Whittakers, who had long been misunderstood and mistreated. But in between those extremes, there was a quieter, more reflective group of people who weren't sure what to believe. They weren't angry or accusatory. They were heartbroken. They didn't want to think that Betty was capable of abuse, but they also couldn't ignore the reality that something serious had happened to trigger a court case. Many of them wrote comments like, "I just hope everyone is safe," or "I wish we knew the truth." It wasn't about taking sides anymore. It was about closure. The human mind craves clarity. When that clarity is withheld, confusion turns to obsession. And that's exactly what began to happen within the online Whittaker community. People began rewatching old videos, looking for clues. Some claimed they noticed red flags they hadn't seen before. Others insisted those so-called signs were taken out of context. It became a cycle of searching and arguing, a never-ending loop of trying to find meaning in a story that no one could fully understand. And while all of this was happening online, Betty herself remained silent. That silence became a story in itself. Why wasn't she speaking out? Why wasn't she defending herself? Was she forbidden from talking due to legal restrictions? Or had she chosen silence as a way to protect herself emotionally? People speculated endlessly, but one truth quietly emerged. The silence was heavy because it represented loss of connection, loss of trust, and perhaps loss of identity. For months, Betty had been seen as a figure of strength. Now she was seen as a question mark. And for someone who had once been part of such a public family narrative, being reduced to silence was a punishment in itself. Still, the more time passed, the more divided the audience became. The supportive side began describing Betty as a martyr of caregiving, someone who sacrificed her own well-being for others. They believed the state's involvement was unnecessary, that instead of helping her, officials were targeting her for struggling under impossible circumstances. The opposing side, meanwhile, pointed to the fact that Adult Protective Services doesn't get involved unless there's cause for concern. They argued that allegations of abuse or neglect don't come out of nowhere. If the state intervened, it was likely because there was credible evidence that something wasn't right. Both perspectives make sense in their own way, and that's what makes the story so haunting. It's not black and white. It's not a simple matter of guilt or innocence. It's a story filled with emotion, fatigue, and the pain of being human. It's the kind of situation that reminds us how complicated caregiving can be, how quickly love and exhaustion can collide, and how easily a caregiver can become both a savior and, unintentionally, a source of harm. The online world rarely has patience for nuance, though. It thrives on certainty, villains and heroes, right and wrong. And Betty's story didn't fit neatly into either category. In every comment section, you could see that struggle playing out. She deserves another chance. She should be in jail. No one knows the full story. Those poor people, I hope they're okay. People weren't just reacting to Betty, they were reacting to themselves, to their own fears about getting old, about being dependent, about being forgotten. The story forced viewers to confront the uncomfortable truth that anyone, even someone who once seemed selfless, can lose control, and perhaps that's why this case has resonated so deeply. It's not just about Betty Whittaker. It's about the fragility of care, the hidden pressures behind the role of a caregiver, and the painful consequences when help arrives too late. The silence from Betty's side might be strategic, or it might be sorrow. But for the people who have followed her journey, that silence is deafening. It leaves space for the imagination to run wild, but it also leaves space for compassion. Even among her critics, there are those who say, if she did fail, maybe she wasn't evil, maybe she was just exhausted. And maybe that's the tragedy of it all, when love and duty become blurred. When one person shoulders too much responsibility without support, the line between care and harm becomes paper thin. The Betty Whittaker story has become a reflection of that fragile line. It forces people to question their own definitions of love, responsibility, and accountability. Because whether you believe Betty is guilty or not, her story is a painful reminder that caregiving, real caregiving, is more than just good intentions. It's a lifelong test of patience, empathy, and endurance. And when that endurance breaks, so does everything else. Comment below. Has society failed caregivers like Betty? Or do you believe some people simply shouldn't be trusted with that kind of responsibility? As time passes, the conversation around Betty Whittaker has evolved from pure outrage and confusion to something more reflective, more human. People are no longer just asking, what did Betty do? They're asking, how did it get to this point? That shift matters because it shows something powerful about the human response to tragedy. At first, people react with anger. They want justice. They want someone to blame. But as the dust settles and as the silence continues, they begin to wonder about the deeper truth, the emotional truth hiding beneath the surface. In Betty's case, that truth may never be fully known. Her court case remains sealed. No public record, no transcript, no verdict for the world to see. And yet, the emotional verdict, the one being decided in the hearts of those who followed her story, continues to unfold every single day. People can't stop thinking about it because this story touches something raw and universal. It's not just about one woman accused of doing wrong. It's about what happens when a person who gives care is pushed to their limit. It's about love, burden, silence, and a system that often leaves everyone, both the caregiver and the cared for, feeling helpless for months. The internet was consumed by the question, is Betty Whittaker guilty of abuse or a victim of circumstance? The truth might be somewhere in between. Caregiving is not a simple act of kindness. It's relentless. It's exhausting. It's emotional warfare. When someone becomes responsible for the lives of others, especially family members, they carry not only physical duties, but emotional weight that can crush even the strongest person. Many of Betty's defenders have spoken about that. They point out how little support she had, how few resources caregivers in small communities like hers receive, and how mental and emotional burnout can drive even good people into making terrible decisions. They say that society expects caregivers to be saints, but gives them no help when they fall apart. That argument isn't an excuse, but it is an explanation, and it raises a haunting question. How many other Betty Whittakers are out there right now, struggling in silence, one mistake away from tragedy? On the other side of that conversation are those who refuse to minimize the allegations. They remind everyone that, no matter the stress or the circumstances, abuse and neglect can never be justified. They argue that the people in Betty's care, the ones who depended on her completely, were the true victims, and that the system must hold her accountable if she failed them. It's a painful but necessary conversation. In the middle of all this moral noise, there's still one haunting reality: the victims themselves. While the public focuses on Betty, their voices remain unheard. Their lives have been altered, their sense of safety shattered. They didn't ask for fame. They didn't ask to become the center of a national debate. Yet their well-being is the very heart of this story. That's why West Virginia law keeps those records sealed. It's meant to protect the dignity and identity of the vulnerable, to shield them from public scrutiny and exploitation. But at the same time, that secrecy comes with a cost. It prevents the truth from ever being fully known, and that's the cruel paradox of this story. The same law that safeguards the victim's privacy also hides the full picture from the people, demanding justice. The more people talk about this case, the clearer it becomes that there's no simple hero or villain here. There's only pain that runs deep on both sides. For Betty, that pain might be the loss of her identity, her freedom, and her reputation. For those she cared for, it's the pain of betrayal and fear. And for the people watching from the outside, it's the pain of not knowing, of being left in the dark, wondering what the truth really is. It's rare for a story to resonate so deeply for so long, especially when so little concrete information is available. But the Betty Whittaker case continues to spark discussion because it forces people to look inward. It forces them to ask uncomfortable questions about themselves, about their families, about what it really means to take care of someone who cannot care for themselves. It reminds us that sometimes the line between love and control isn't drawn clearly, that someone can believe they're doing the right thing until suddenly they're accused of doing terrible harm. That realization is hard to face. The truth is, caregiving, real caregiving, changes people. It wears them down, reshapes their hearts, and tests their souls. It can bring out extraordinary compassion or quiet cruelty. And sometimes it brings out both. The Whittaker case has exposed something society rarely talks about: the emotional toll of long-term care. It's easy to praise caregivers for their dedication, but much harder to confront what happens when that dedication turns to resentment, exhaustion, or hopelessness. Because behind every caregiver, there's a story of lost sleep, unpaid bills, and forgotten dreams, a story of isolation, guilt, and the desperate hope that their efforts will be enough. But what happens when it's not? What happens when the person trying to help becomes the one accused of harm? That's the heart of the Betty Whittaker story. It's not just about legal papers or sealed courtrooms. It's about the emotional collapse that can happen when someone who gives everything has nothing left to give. It's also about the failures of the systems around her, Adult protective services exist to intervene when people in care are at risk. But by the time they step in, the damage is often already done. That's not just a failure of the caregiver, it's a failure of a society that doesn't offer help soon enough. Still, accountability matters. If Betty did harm those she cared for, whether intentionally or through neglect, that harm deserves to be acknowledged. The people she was responsible for deserve protection, justice, and a chance to heal, but accountability and compassion are not opposites. It's possible to demand justice for victims and still feel empathy for the person who caused the pain. That's the emotional depth of this story. It's why so many can't walk away from it. It's not just scandal, it's tragedy. The question now isn't just, what will happen to Betty Whittaker? It's, what will we learn from her story? Will we learn to better support caregivers before they reach a breaking point? Will we create systems that protect the vulnerable and the people who care for them? Will we finally admit that caregiving, the work so many take for granted, is one of the hardest, most emotionally demanding responsibilities a person can carry? Those are the questions that remain long after the headlines fade, and maybe that's what makes this story matter most. It's not the mystery or the drama, it's the mirror it holds up to all of us. It forces us to think about the fragile nature of compassion. It reminds us that good intentions aren't always enough. It asks us to see the human side of both the accused and the victims, to hold two truths at once, that someone can love deeply and still cause harm, that someone can mean well and still fail catastrophically. Whether Betty Whittaker's silence is guilt, grief, or exhaustion, we may never know. But silence doesn't erase the lessons her story has left behind. It's a reminder that accountability without empathy becomes cruelty, and empathy without accountability becomes denial. Real justice, the kind that heals rather than destroys, requires both. The Whittaker case might never be fully understood, but it has already changed the way many people view caregiving, responsibility, and the hidden weight of family duty, and maybe, in some strange way, that's the only closure we'll ever get, because in the end, this story isn't just about Betty Whittaker or the people she cared for. It's about all of us, the fragile, imperfect humans trying to do right by others, while carrying the unbearable burden of being human ourselves. Comment below. Do you think Betty Whittaker's story is one of failure, misunderstanding, or something more complicated? And what does this case teach us about the fine line between love, care, and responsibility? Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.